Alright, looking at the start of a new project now. And this is actually another blaster commissioned by the same guy who is commissioning the Centaur. And this is actually going to be a accompanying blaster to go along with. Also going to be a Striturian platform, Strife and a Centurion. But this is going to be a much more traditional style, heavily inspired by his request, by the Devil's Wing by Naptown Nerf, and I'll put a link in the description for that video. But this is actually going to be part of a his and hers set. He liked the Centaur so much that he also wanted, or his wife basically wanted a custom blaster as well. But we're going to go with more of a traditional style for her. So at the end of the day, it's going to be a matched set, and it's going to be very, very cute, I suppose. But I figured we'd start. This is just basic Strife, got some aftermarket goodies on it. He wants this Worker F10 555 magwell grip. It's got a riot cage right now and a few basic upgrades. Worker, mag release, foam blast rev trigger, and I believe an artifact firing trigger. But the big issue here, not issue, but the big thing, is basically making the first initial cuts on the Centurion. Now this is going to be the more traditional style. So we are going to be maintaining the Strife trigger and just basically cutting the end off of the Centurion. But since I've never done this before on one of these, I'm going to leave plenty of extra room. So where a lot of integrations of this style basically make the cut right here at the end where this line drops off, I'm going to add a little bit more material just so I have enough to work with if I decide to do anything unique or custom or whatever up front. I'm going to take this line here across the bottom, since we're going to be lapping onto the Strife magwell, and I figured just leave as much material as possible, not knowing what we're going to be doing up here, because I do want to take a unique approach to this integration. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut out kind of this magwell area here altogether in case we need to use this material for something. So I'm just basically following this line up here and around this bump, and up here, and then straight up kind of in the middle of the magwell. That should give us enough material to work with up front without really cutting up too much other stuff. And back here, since we are keeping the Strife grip, I'm going to cut out the Centurion grip, but I want to try to keep this area as clean as possible, and since this area here is a lot different on the Strife, I'm going to see if I can tie in maybe the whole back part of the grip, perhaps. I've seen that done on different blasters, different integrations. So I'm just basically going to cut out from here, kind of in the middle here, and kind of, midway down here, just to get rid of the bulk of the grip so we can start settling the shells together. And then of course we'll trim up as we need to make room, because we'll have to cut out, kind of this shape here out of this to make it match up, and then we'll kind of see what happens here. We might end up just cutting it off kind of the way most other Strife Centurion integrations have been done that I've seen in the past. But we're going to start off with some rather conservative cuts until we actually start fitting the shells together, and so I'll go ahead and cut out the bulk of those on both sides of the shell and see how things fit, and we'll check in with you later. Okay, got a majority of the shell cut away and just kind of focusing mostly on getting ready to start fitting the grip. And I had originally wanted to keep kind of this solid arc here all unmolested, but lining up kind of the toe here, because I like the way this kind of tubular looking thing comes down here and meets in with the bottom of the grip. I want to kind of maintain that, and it looks pretty good if I keep this lined up like that, and that also puts this little bump down thing in a good place above the trigger, or ahead of the trigger. Whereas if I had moved this back to where because if this is here, then you see where the grip cuts in a lot further here compared to the Strife, and so you end up with not very much room between the web of your hand and the trigger, so it'd be kind of cramped there. And just this whole area here is kind of skinny, and the grip gets a little weird shaped doing it that way. But if we end up just removing this piece altogether, like most of the other builds, we're able to line up this here and move this ahead, in kind of a better location as well. And that pulls the stock itself, I guess makes it just a tiny bit shorter, like half an inch shorter or so. But But that's okay because the owner is going to be a bit smaller as well. So I was told keep the thing small and compact. So that kind of fits the bill there. So I'm going to go ahead, I think, and probably bring it up into here, probably cut that off here, eliminate this piece, and then we'll start settling the grip in between a little bit. Alright guys, this is kind of what we're looking at right now. This is kind of the final fitting before I glue it together, but I wanted to kind of show you guys what I'd been doing in the meantime. But this is now sitting on a chunk of like granite countertop that I happened to find in the house when I bought it. And I needed a nice flat surface because what I wanted to do was to fill in this slot here, but I needed a real dead flat surface to hold it against, because this piece here tends to misshape a little bit. I noticed that with the Centaur, is that for whatever reason having the big slot in here leaves this spot able to flex a little bit. It doesn't want to line up exactly, so I actually had to force it into shape while the DevCon dried, but now it's pretty darn solid and fits together really, really well. So what we have I did have to do quite a bit of rather mild trimming in order to get the shell to fit the way I wanted it to, and this is pretty rough, but I figured that's not too bad since it's going to be covered up anyway. But I did have to take this little drop down out because of this spot here. A lot of the other striped Shurian type builds that I've seen just basically cut this part off straight, but the back end of the stripe here is rather narrow, but this is still pretty wide when it comes down, and so you end up with kind of a rather radical drop off where it just kind of squares off or looks weird. And so I end up trimming the back end off here so that I could get the pieces to fit it in together better, so that I can have this part kind of round in too. And so I removed a little more material than I probably needed to, but I might eliminate a little bit more so that I can have this line here kind of come in this way and trim this off so it kind of blends in real nice and looks more like the original Centurion grip. The way this just kind of all flows together and looks like it's supposed to be that way, because it is. I had to remove a little bit of the bottom of the, I guess, bottom of the heel area and just the very bottom here in order to get these to match up pretty good. On this side, these didn't go exactly the way I wanted it to. I cut the holes out where the motors are going to be, even though they're fangs. I did cut all the way open for the motor cover, even though this is going to act as the motor cover, because I didn't have this fit figured out quite yet. And I've seen other Striturians, I got some Googling done and looked at different pictures, and a lot of guys were able to have this line here. Let me pull it in a little bit. This line here be just the right height to where it just lays on top of the strife motor cover, but I don't know if that leaves their strife off center in the shell or not, because I couldn't for the life of me get it to work that way. But the way I have it here, it looks pretty darn centered, and everybody seems to be fitting together quite happily. But this piece here on either side of the Mega Magwell fit just flush with the side of the strife, which is very, very nice. And that way I know that if these, since the strife, at least this aspect of the strife, is symmetrical, then we should be able to have the same distance on either side here, should center up the blaster itself within the Centurion shell. So really relying on that. And the cool part is the bottom of the strife where the battery door is and the accompanying flat spot here line up just about perfect with the flat spot here on the bottom of the Centurion, which worked out really good. And what I ended up doing in order to get that fit perfect is I ended up trimming an awful lot out of the inside of the Centurion. In fact, I closed it up, in preparation for hot gluing the shells together, but I'll open it up real quick to show you kind of what I ended up having to do in order to get the shell to fit inside. Because there's a lot of little tricks I was able to do to get the shells to fit and align themselves, so I'm not having to try to balance and hold things while the hot glue cures. For one thing, the right side of the shell, I ended up having to take all the way down just to where it's just the outer layer of the shell. I mean, there's kind of lined up there. Yeah, you can kind of see there's no structural support or anything. It's just the bare minimum material here in order to get the stripe to fit inside. But I ended up hogging out the area just inside of the tactical rail, and then shaving off just the outside lips, like the outside little bit of the strife rail, to where the strife tactical rail actually fits inside of the bottom of the Centurion tactical rail, so that I was able to trim down the sides to where it was just the inside dimension, and then I just used these little tiny pieces of sheet styrene like I've done in the past and just shimmed it out a little bit, just enough to where when you put the shells together, there's no wiggle sideways. That should just be right on the center line, and that's just by shoving it up in here and holding it this way. Should align the shell this way and align it all the way as it needs to be. Also, to get the front end aligned as well, I took a couple pieces of just shell scraps that I had from stuff I cut off and just built it up to where the top of the tactical rail was flush with a good surface here, which was just about the top of the little iron sight looking piece here. There again, so I had a nice surface that I could just take the blaster and just kind of drop it up in there, and it locates itself. There's a little tiny shim. These little white pieces are just more little tiny shims in order to just locate the strife height-wise in the Centurion shell. And of course these shims locate it side to side. So like I said, once you stick it all together, having those little shims guiding it in, you just take the strife, drop it up in there, and everybody literally locks into place and puts it right where you need it. That lines up these guys, lines up this guy pretty good. Also aligns the center pretty darn close. There's just a little bit of wiggle. A lot of that is just in the shell itself, because we are dealing with not a lot of material till we glue it into place. So I'm going to get ready to go ahead and bond the shells with the hot glue. Then I'll go through and make sure everything is just copacetic. And once everything is fitting exactly the way I want it to, I will apply the DevCon. And once that is established, then we can finally come across and start working on the front, because I did leave enough material so I could, I left a lot of room up here just so I can kind of fit it the way I want it to once everything's all together. But since we're going to be using that ammo counter that has the that universal fit with the front end little muzzle clip-on guy, we need to have full access to the muzzle attachment piece, so I can't have that shrouded at all. An idea I'd kicked around initially was to, kind of like I mocked up here, do kind of a angle cut following the front here and maybe carry it forward with some material, add some material down here, and have a little bit of a different shape, or even carry this straight out and then just do something decorative to the end. Maybe not this far, but just something to kind of shroud the in-strike muzzle, because I just don't like, I'm not a big fan aesthetically of how that muzzle piece looks. But since we need the functionality of that, we need to be able to twist, and this guy's got this little the lead coming out of the bottom, so that kind of hampers things a little bit. So we'll just, like I said, we'll get this bonded in place, then we can come up here and start trimming this back to where we can access the barrel enough to use the attachment thing. So that's where we're at right now.